What would you like to share with us?
No. You have it all wrong there, Mike.
Well, see,
wrong.
Why don't you tell us how we have it wrong? Go ahead.
Because the books were circulating. You're right. The books were circulating. They were circulating. There's no doubt about that. But they were not pulled together into the New Testament that you now know until 40 years after Constantine proclaimed Christianity as the religion of the realm. Now,
there's a scholar who actually feels he's got a codex with the books all bound together in codex book form, going way back to the 1st century based on the writing and stuff like that. So you're making an assumption that they weren't putting those books together prior. That's a big assumption on your part, and I think you're wrong, and you're entitled, again, you say no, you're bringing up points that listeners might be interested in, but there are always points attacking the way evangelicals would look at Christianity, and you said in the past many times you used to be an evangelical, and we understand where you're coming from. Again, Jesus is your only salvation, but let's move on. We're not going to argue that point. People can look it up, do the research on the internet, email us, email people in New Thought, and come to your own conclusion about the truth. This is all about truth-seeking. So, Richard, anything else you want to say besides that point? Unless you got some more light to shed on it.
Yeah, just one last little point.
Okay.
To your guest there. Now, my brother is a former Foursquare ministerial student, and I have talked him into becoming a New Thought follower.
Ooh,
so there's hope for you.
I'll pray for him.
Have a great evening.
I think the New Thought argument was the same one that Satan used on Eve in the garden, that you can know more if you do it Satan's way. And
you can be as God.
Yeah.
You can be as God if we can all be Christ consciousness.
It worked back then, and he's still using it today.
And it works today, and many people, we're sad for that guy because he's been led astray, but people were being led astray right away from the get-go. Paul talks about that, the apostles. Thanks for calling, Richard. So, we could show another segment of film, unless there's someone else on the line. I don't think so at the moment. So why don't we show this next section of film, this one's a short one, 2.5 minutes, and we can be back and talk some more after that about Jesus being God, which is, it was so perfectly, the point was made by the speaker a few minutes ago on film, Jesus saying, before Abraham was, I am, and all the other Jewish people knew what he was talking about. That was God's name. He's calling himself God, and they were going to stone him. And the other point, forgiving the sins, only God could do that. Let's see what he has to say relating to some of that now further. So we'll see you in about 2.5 minutes.
Example of asinine fatuity. John 8:45. Can anyone prove me guilty of sin? Stand up, the man or woman, fellow or girl or child, who could dare to say right here in the midst of us all, I am not guilty of any sin. You're just about to sit down. I don't blame you. Yeah. That is the most ridiculous challenge any man could have made. Remember where he is. He's in front of the very people who are looking for an opportunity to put him down. He's in front of the very people who are trying to dismiss him, surrounded by his critics, desperate to prove him blasphemous. And he says, can anyone prove me guilty of sin? You go for a job interview, you sit down, and they ask you why you'll fit in with this company. Try it if you apply for a job with AIG and see what happens. Well, first of all, you need to understand, most important thing, I have never done anything wrong in my life, and I never will. Do you think you'll get the job? Surely Christ is finished. A claim too far. Very easy to check it out. You've only got to go down to Nazareth with your clipboard and your tape recorder, knock on a few doors. Do you know where the carpenter lived? Oh yeah, just up there. He's gone now, but yeah, okay, I know. But knock on a few doors down the high street in Nazareth. Ask about this child Jesus, the son of Mary. What was he like as a kid? Did you ever see him in the street on his back, kicking his legs in the air, throwing a tantrum? Well, actually, no, you can't admit, we never did. What was he like in the classroom? Did he, when the teacher's back was turned, do flick? No. What was he like with the girls? You know, there was something about this young child as he grew up into teenage years, through into manhood. He was remarkably different. And then 30 years later, he stands in front of his critics and says, "Who can convince me of sin?" And 2,000 years later, only the grubby minds of cheap novelists and dirty filmmakers can do anything about it. There's nothing in history. This man is unique, perfect. One of the most beautiful testimonials were ever given to Jesus comes in Luke chapter 15 and verse 2, and it comes from the teeth of the men who hate him. Do you know what they said? "This man welcomes sinners." No, they didn't say it like that. They said, "This man welcomes sinners." That was the biggest put down they could ever give. It is the most beautiful testimonial to Jesus. If that was not true, you wouldn't be here, and neither would I. This man welcomes. The Jesus of history, the Jesus of reality, the Jesus of prophecy.
Welcome back. Sean, we were talking to Reverend Richard, and he's talking about Jesus saying, "Who can convict me of sin?"
Right.
So here we are again, the original lie, we can be as God. Both points that were made before, anyone in New Thought, anyone who's a guru, or anyone who in the world who comes up and says, "Can you convict me of any sin in my life?" How far would they get, number one?
They might get a week.
and number two, how many of them could get away with forgiving everybody else's sins against everybody else?
And back it up with healing that goes with it, And
Right. And how would they be received? I mean, if I came to you and said, "Sean, you're forgiven of your sin against so-and-so." I mean, where does that come from? I mean, it's not logical. It's totally out of the realm of logic.
I'd be slightly amused and then move on.
But this man who Einstein said had all the answers to solving man's moral problems, and most people consider Jesus pretty bright, he went around doing this stuff. So either he wasn't as bright as we think, or he was God, because only God would be offended by sin and forgive it.
And then also, what Einstein is, here you've got the world would claim he's one of the smartest men in the world, claiming that if people followed the teachings of Jesus, that all society's problems would go away. And who was the other one? Was it Moses? Moses' law. So this guy, he may not have jumped on board himself, but I think he was living a lifestyle that he would have probably had to give up, like most of us do when we choose to follow Jesus. The world and Satan would tell us that life will be more fulfilling, and you're not going to find out until you do give it up and follow Jesus. But you see very few people that give it up and follow Jesus ever going back to a lifestyle, so obviously there is something better there.
Absolutely, and we would see it when you read about Einstein's life. There were a parent, he was married several times, and there were reports of him being a bit of a woman chaser, whatever, and a lot of us have done that in the past.
Yeah,
but you have to be saying, "Hey, I'm going to follow you, Jesus, and follow what God says about what sin is, so I don't offend you."
And even the earlier caller, our first caller, had said, "How come that we only seem to turn to God when we hit the bottom?" And it's because, I suppose, like Einstein has been womanizing and me doing my partying, is that if you're having fun, who needs God? And then it's only when you suffer the consequences of the so-called fun, because the consequences of sin is death, and you run out of that, and you see the world for what it is and the empty promises, that you're finally willing to go to God. So there's very few people, I think, that come to God when everything is rosy in their lives, unless they're facing death and they start wondering where they're going to go. It's usually when the things you thought would make you happy don't.